I'm Andy Smiley, your friendly podcast guide. I help you start, launch, and grow a podcast that is fun and fulfilling. Whether you're just starting or a few years in, I share tips, stories from my own journey, and insights from podcasters I admire. Hi, I've missed you. Today I'm sharing a bonus episode where I interview Jen Morris, who has amazing insights into being a creative, a business owner, and a mom. I had so much fun chatting with her, and I had a lot of my own aha moments, so I can't wait for you to hear this episode. And just as a reminder, at the end of the episode, I'll talk about the main takeaways from my conversation with Jen, so you don't have to take notes unless you want to. I am so excited to have Jen Morris on the podcast today. She doesn't have a podcast that I'm aware of, but she has a lot of really interesting outlooks on motherhood and business, and so I had to have her on. Thank you so much for being here, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks for making an exception. I actually had a podcast during COVID that was called The Well-Rounded Actor, that I talked a lot about mental, physical, and emotional wellness for actors because I have an acting background. And then I had another short-lived one called Renegade Motherhood, but it was more a nutrition wellness approach. And then I had a total just shift in everything I was doing. And so I might have a podcast again in the future, but I'm just not there quite yet. So, but I have had podcasts, so I know they're a lot of work, and yes. You really have to love it to keep doing it too, I think. So I learned a lot doing my podcast.
I will say, once you've had a podcast, then you're probably going to have more. I feel like that's been my experience is once you kind of get the taste, you're like, I could do a podcast about that, or I can do a podcast about that. So yeah, no, totally. I feel you. And we're all going to be excited whenever your next podcast comes to fruition. But also I am the first person to always say, if the timing isn't right, don't do it. If a podcast is not fitting into your life, do not do it until you are ready.
Yeah, because there are I think more work than people think that they are.
Yeah. I feel like people either think they're no work or too much work. And but it's somewhere in the middle. And I think it just kind of ebbs and flows with whatever you're doing. So yeah. Oh, I love that. I'm glad that's fun. I didn't even know that you had podcasts, but now you kind of get my people, even though you currently don't have a podcast, but you get it. You get the vibe.
Totally. No, and I think what you're doing is awesome.
Oh, thank you. My first question that I like to ask is, what is the last podcast you listened to for you? Not for research, not for businessy stuff, but just for you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say most of the time when I listen to podcasts, it's for research or business. So, but I listen to a ton of audiobooks, fictional audiobooks. I'm probably averaging 1 or 2 a week because
That's awesome.
I just love fiction.
The second question I ask is, what is a simple thing you're doing in your life to make it better right now?
I mean, this is kind of a big answer. It's not this one specific thing, but I have been embracing main character energy. I've spent the last year really, not even a full year, but just really getting back into my zone of genius, what I do best, and showing up in that. And it's just fun. I have so much less self-doubt. I'm doing a lot more public speaking. And I will say, if that was a specific thing to point to, I have an acting background. I love performing. And when I had kids, it just became a little bit harder to have access to that because, your schedule is not your own anymore. And my priorities had shifted. And so just over the last year, I've really stepped into more public speaking, both through, my business, through a women's chorus that I'm part of. So I just noticed that when I am kind of, this is going to sound egotistical, but in the spotlight, because that's something that really fuels me and draws the right people to me. So and I think, people who podcast can get that, when you're in your element, when you're in your zone, when you have a topic that you really can show up and talk about every week or every other week, it's working if it's you feel good doing it, and if people are responding to it. And so while I'm not doing a podcast right now, I am guesting on a lot of podcasts, and I'm also finding live stages, and that's just been so good for me to get back into that part of my life that I was really missing.
Totally. Oh, I love that. And I think that's different for everyone, but finding that thing that just like feeds your soul
Mm-hmm.
is just the best. It's just so good when you're able to figure out what it is and then lean into it. So,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for answering those. Those questions are almost more for me than for my listeners because I usually get more out of them. Like I love the idea. I need a reminder pretty often of like being the main character of my own story because especially as a mom, I feel like sometimes we just get stuck in the mode of taking care of kids and their needs coming before ours, and we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves too and do things that we love. And I always just like to
100%.
hear what people are listening to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty much for me, but I'm sure that all of you out there are also enjoying the recommendations. But um okay, so now we're going to dive into some questions that I have for you, Jen, because I know that you just are a wealth of knowledge. So, one of the things that I've noticed that a lot of my community struggles with, me included, is self doubt and that inner critic. So, what's your advice for moms who are holding themselves back because of the little voice in their head that's questioning if they're good enough to do whatever it is? Start a podcast is for me and my people, but like, anything that moms are holding themselves back from.
Yeah, I think like you said, motherhood and self-doubt go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And we Google like my kid isn't sleeping, what do I do? And we're given 85,000 opinions slash clinical studies slash New York Times bestsellers slash podcasts slash, and it the feedback we're getting is like one, overwhelm, two, like everyone knows better than me what to do. And so it's
Yeah.
like we're on this border constantly of like it's great to have support groups, it's great to have Facebook groups, it's great because it can create community, but it can also breed this sense of self-doubt and insecurity, and then that feeds over into like other things in our life. So I think like the one thing is sometimes we have to like separate a little bit. Like there could be something going on with your family or your kids where you are feeling like I really do need some extra support. Like this is beyond my depth. I do need, a coach or a doctor or whatever to be a guide for this. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like you need it in every other part of your life too. If I'm having a moment of like self-doubt or imposter syndrome, I have to kind of step back and be like, where is this really coming from? Is this because I had a fight with my spouse over the weekend and that is like still kind of on my mind? Is it because I had a really, really rough night of sleep? And so we have to kind of think about like what are the like other things going on that could actually be like a filter that we're running this decision through, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, and then like find ways to kind of like step back from it. I think the other thing that I'm talking about more is this idea of like doing things also that's within your zone of genius, which is something a lot of people talk about. I sort of bring this other layer of like main character energy, main character persona, because my background is like in acting, and so that's kind of like some of the language that I speak. But I think like what happened to me when I had kids was I had built this whole business, several businesses for many, many years before having kids. And I did a lot of public speaking, a lot of networking events, a lot of workshops, all the things, and it worked. And then I had kids, and all of a sudden I was like, well, I have to do everything differently now because now I have kids. And yes, I needed to change some things. But so I was like, well, now I have to do everything online. And everyone's saying that in order to be successful, you have to have 80,000 funnels and 4,000 lead magnets. And, you have to be on Substack and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and, TikTok. And you can't do all that. And so, but I was trying to do it, and I was trying to like bring people onto the team that could build out all these things. And I hated it. I was miserable because I wasn't actually like building my business in a way that aligned with my main character energy, which is being out in front of people. And so I would say, like, if you're a mom listening to this and you're like, I have an idea for a podcast or a business or a creative endeavor, like, be careful about who you're taking advice from of how to get that out into the world. Because if it's not someone who A, knows what you're trying to create, or B, understands your innate gifts and strengths, you're going to try to build it someone else's way, and it's probably not going to feel good, and that's going to breed self-doubt. Because you're like, well, wait, I'm doing all the things they're telling me to, and it's not working for me. And it could be because like you're doing things that don't necessarily align with like how you actually want to launch a podcast, grow a business, all the things.
Totally.
So yeah.
I agree with everything you said. And I think, especially with what you said about listening to people who get you, when you listen to people who are also like in similar life stages, like we're both moms, so we get
Mhm.
that we're
Mhm.
going to have to do things a little differently. Like in the podcasting world, a lot of people will say you have to put out an episode every week and be consistent to
Right.
grow.
Right.
And I tried that. I tried that way and I totally burned out. Like it was just not a good fit for me. And I like almost stopped podcasting altogether. So I'm like the poster child for
I
don't
love
do it someone
that.
else's way. Do
Yes.
it the way that works for you and listen to people who are in similar situations. So now I really only take advice from podcast coaches
Mhm.
who are at the very minimum married. And anyone that I listen to pretty much is a mom because they get it. They understand that your priorities do shift and your time allotments shift
It's
and you
different. Yeah.
you want to be with your kids sometimes so you can't be gone every weekend doing like networking events, so I love the idea of make sure you like be intentional about who you're listening to so that you can do what you want to do in a way that feeds you.
And like a podcast can be successful without having a million downloads,
Yeah.
and so it's like if you're listening to somebody, I think so many times we jump to what someone else's definition of success is instead of
Mhm.
figuring out what it is for us first. And so it's
Totally.
like, so we skip a step. And I mean, I can say that because I've done it 100,000 times, I mean, I'm the
Yes,
queen of
yes,
like, let's
yes.
skip to like the end before we've read, the first 5 chapters, right? And
Totally.
so yeah, and there's so many people out there like, a successful podcast means you have sponsors and means you have a million downloads and you're the top, 0.001% of listens and everything. And like, but that's not necessarily why everyone gets into podcasting. Some people get into podcasting because they have a story to tell. And so
Yeah.
I think it's awesome that you saw where it was going with the burnout. And I mean, that was my experience too with podcasting with my first show. And I was like, all of a sudden I was like, I don't like this anymore. This is taking up so much time. Like, why am I even doing this? It's not helping me meet my bottom line. It was fun. I'm proud of what I put out, but it's time to stop for a while and see how I feel. And I didn't miss it. And now if I do another show, I'm much clearer on like why I would be doing the show
Totally.
and what I want to
Yeah.
get out of it. And then, yeah, look for people
Yes.
who are in, kind of have some similar life experience and also know what it is you're actually trying to create instead of forcing their idea of success on you, which I think is often what
Totally.
can happen in a coaching situation.
Mhm. Yeah. You're totally right. When I help clients launch their podcast, truly the first thing that we go over is their why. Why are you doing this podcast?
Yeah.
And at least one of those things has to have nothing to do with anyone else. It has to do with you. Like
Mm,
if your podcast is so that you can verbally process, that's a great reason why. Or if it's so that you have an outlet that has nothing to do with your children, that's a great reason to have a
yeah,
podcast.
totally.
But it isn't like all of your whys can't be so that I can help other people do
Right.
blah 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 blah. It has to have there has to be a reason for you, just you, that you're doing it. So I absolutely love
Awesome.
that. Yeah.
Awesome. It's great.
Okay. So back to moms and businesses and hobbies and all of the things like we're trying to be our own person, but also we're moms. So like that can get a little messy. I've noticed again for me and for my community, my listeners, that like boundaries are hard.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have any advice for moms who are struggling with boundaries. Like they want to have their own thing, they want to have a podcast, they want to have a business, they want to have a creative outlet that's theirs, but they also want to spend time with their kids. So they don't know how to make those boundaries work on both sides. Like they don't want to always let their kids into their creative outlet, but they also don't want their creative outlet to take over and make it so they don't hang out with their kids. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Any advice on boundaries?
I know that I am happier when I have other things to do that don't involve my family. Now, some people might come at me for that, like whatever, they're not my people, so that's fine. And the other piece is it's part of like self care, which I honestly hate that expression, but for lack of a better one, then it's like we have to communicate about it. And I know for a long time I was expecting my husband to read my mind, and spoiler alert, Most husbands don't have that ability.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Right.
But no.
Right. And no matter what kind of relationship you're in, any kind of relationship, that could be a friendship, it could be with a business partner, it could be with your team, like I, our kids, like we cannot expect people to read our minds. And so, for me, it was like, I, you know, singing once a week in my chorus was important to me. Being out with people, these networking events I'm doing, growing is important to me. It's important to our family, and it's important to my mental health, and it makes me happy. So communicating that, and then like working together as a family unit, sometimes with your kids, depending on how old your kids are, to like make that happen. Like, so it's not so much of like the permission seeking. um it's more of like, hey, like I've identified that I want to start a podcast, so I would like to invite you into the conversation to see how we can set this up so that I'm able to do it in a way that, is fulfilling for me and isn't like a huge source of stress for the family. So can we talk about it? The other side of this is like, as your kids get older, involving them in it too. And I'm really direct with my kids when I need to be, not about like every single thing. But I have a 7.5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and my 7.5-year-old sometimes struggles when I go to choir once a week. And so instead of just being like, well, I'm going because I'm going, it's like, well, Neve, you know how you really like play dates with your friends? This is like kind of mom's play date every week. I get to go. Singing is really important to me. Like, before I had you, I sang all the time. And I don't do that as much now because I do want to spend time with you, but it's really important for me to have that one night a week because it just really makes me happy. And then you get to come see me sing in a show, which they did, last night. And then when it's a business related things, that is more fun. But when it's business related, like the summit, I was gone. I was, a little more like gone last week, just prepping for stuff like that, and a couple of earlier mornings and stuff, and times when I wasn't, going to drop them off. And I said, well, this is mom's big event, and I really need you to be my cheerleader. And, what are we going to do to celebrate when this is over? Like, where are we going to go have dinner tonight when this is done? And this is why I'm building this business. And so just like you said, you ask people why they're starting their podcast. We also have to share that with people, and not just people who are going to spend money on us necessarily, or give us a download or give us a listen. Like, we really have to like share that with like our family unit. Because I think so often we just look at it as like, well, it's a job to make money, to put a roof over our heads or whatever. And we don't actually go deeper with them. And so then it just allows me to also then like model what that looks like, what having boundaries looks like, what putting myself first looks like. So I just feel like it's such a communication. Everyone talks about communicate, but it's like, it's not just saying like, hey, I'm doing this. It's about like, how can we share our vision with others and then also allow them to be like actually part of kind of the conversation.
Definitely.
But from a place of, this is happening.
Yes, yes. Yeah, not a,
So
"Hey, kids, is it okay would you feel okay if?"
yeah.
It's a, "Hey, this is what's happening. I'm starting a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
How can we make sure that you still feel loved and you still feel a part of it?" And I love that you said, like, "How are we gonna celebrate?" Because that is one thing that I've started doing is, like, when I wrap up a season or, like, I offer, like, podcast coaching, like, group coaching
Mm-hmm.
packages and things like that, and like after a launch I'll bring home like Martinelli's, and we'll
Yeah.
have Martinelli's for dinner that night to
Nice.
celebrate, to be like, hey, the hard thing's over, mom's back. Like, you did the thing, we did
Yeah.
the thing, we made it through the week. And I feel like I am modeling that for my kids in a way that feels good. When I do it right, those boundaries feel good and they don't feel
Right.
oppressive either way. And truly, like, so I have two little girls and a boy,
Okay.
and I want all of my children to feel like they can go for their dreams, but I want my little girls to feel it even more because I feel like I didn't feel that way for a very
Mm,
long time
okay.
as a mom. And even like as a teenager growing up, I was like, oh no, as soon as I become a mom, my life becomes taking care of children and I don't have a life anymore. And I do not want my little girls to feel that way. And so one of my favorite parts of starting a podcast was that my little girl, who was 3 at the time, she started carrying around a notebook and being like, I'm working on my podcast right now. And it was just the
My kids do
cutest
that too.
thing.
They make me Renegade Motherhood signs and
Oh
like,
my
you know,
gosh.
like my mom created Renegade Motherhood, but like that doesn't happen if you don't involve them in the conversation. Like, so that's where it is this sort of, you know, not everything has to bleed into everything all the time at all. You do have to have those boundaries, but like the vision, the reason why, like that needs to become part of like a fabric of the family, because especially when it is an entrepreneurial endeavor, because you know it's just different. It's more mission based, it's more movement based versus, you know, a job where maybe it's like I have to go, but like when I clock out, I clock out and I don't want to think about it. As
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs and creative, you know, people, it's kind of always there, and so we have to learn how to turn that off, but also to, when it is there a little bit more one week, to be able to like explain why and create excitement and make it like a team effort so that everybody
Definitely.
feels the payoff and not just the stress.
Yes. Well, and I think, and I really I love that you talked about like communicating more than just, hey, this is going to happen, but like, this is why I'm doing this is so that I can like feel happy. Like, we want you to feel happy, but also we want mom to feel happy. And mom deserves happiness just as much as you do. And I think that feels so selfish the first time you say it to your kids. At least it did for me. And I think the more that I've said it, the more I've realized that it's actually not selfish, because I'm helping my children learn that their happiness matters no matter what. If they become a parent, when they get married, whatever it is, like their happiness always matters.
Yes.
And I
And when
think
you're happier, they're happier. And so it's
exactly when
like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, totally.
yeah.
So it's a
And
win-win.
it is so hard to not feel selfish about that sometimes.
Yeah, it's a lot of many, many decades of conditioning, I think, that, you know,
Yes.
we're trying to
Ugh,
now like kind of unlearn, and yeah. So,
totally. Oh
and it's
man.
not always easy too. I mean, it's easy to
No.
get on podcasts and be like, I just am so great at communicating and my family always has my back. Like, no, that's not it at all. You know, if 70% of the time, like everyone's, you know, hanging in there, it's like great. But there are mornings that they don't want to go to school, or they don't this, or they really don't want me to. I know this week I've got choir tomorrow, and then I've got a board meeting, the board I'm part of, on Wednesday, and I kind of forgot about that. And so I know they're going to be like, you said you'd be home this week. And I'm gonna feel some guilt, you know, but it's having to like just be really clear, like, hey, I totally understand. Yeah, you're right. I have been busy, but you know, it's like the reason that I do this is because of this, and the reason that I do this is because of this. And I know you may not always understand, but you
Yeah.
know, I love you, and I'll be back in time for bed, or you know, whatever that is.
Yeah,
So yeah,
totally. And I think seeing your mistakes as like learning opportunities, be like, "Ooh, crap, I did forget about that board meeting and I
yeah,
did tell them I was going to do that." Like, "Okay, so what can I do differently
I
next
know.
time so that doesn't happen?" You
Yeah,
know? Like,
yeah.
"Okay. Okay, let's see what we can do
More
here." And maybe
Martinelli's.
and maybe like even involving your kids in that, being like,
Yeah.
"Y'all, I just messed up. What can we do differently so this doesn't happen again,
Mm,
because
yeah.
this isn't great and I don't want this to happen again." Like,
Yeah.
I see that this is not a good thing. I love that. So one thing that I am trying to get better at, and I know I've talked to a lot of people, like a lot of my listeners who feel similarly. We know that like networking is a really good thing about building a community, helping people learn about our podcast, learn about our side hustles, whatever. But it can be really hard. So how have you like figured out how to network as a mom? Because I feel like for me, I like going to networking events, but like finding them and then like making sure that they're a good fit and like all of those little details can be really hard. So do you have
Yeah.
any like thoughts on that?
I couldn't find it, so I created my own.
Oh, there you go. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like networking is a huge part of my story. You know, I joined my first professional networking group when I was like 27 and living in New York City, and like really didn't even know what networking was. But but then even though I was part of that organization for many, many years, and it, you know, was amazing and taught me a lot about networking and business development. It was like a weekly 7 a.m. meeting. And when I had my first daughter, I took her to one meeting in like the little bucket, and I was like, she was asleep. And as soon as that meeting started, she woke up and screamed the whole time. And I was like, it's been real, y'all. I'm out. It's been a fun couple of years. But so I think for moms specifically, like, I mean, I could totally shamelessly like plug, what I have going on, but I think there's lots of also different ways to network. So I don't think that like you have to, in order to network, you don't have to, it doesn't mean you have to be going to like, a chamber event or a BNI, which was the group I was in, which again, a great group. And if you're in a place where like you can commit to like a weekly kind of event, cool. I think the key is like, if we're talking about networking groups, I'll kind of talk about a couple different things. If we're talking about networking groups, like the biggest thing is like, if you find one that you do like, go as often as you can. And like find a place that maybe there isn't an attendance policy, because I do find those were really tricky, because your kids, you have the best of intentions and your kid wakes up puking and like you can't go. So finding groups that like meet enough that you can, plug in consistently, but aren't so rigid that like you feel like you're afraid to join, because if you do, and you can't go, you're going to be like ostracized. Because there are some groups that are pretty hardcore like that. And I think if you've got young kids, those can be tricky. I think, however, there are like other ways you can network. So if you are somebody that's, involved in your kid's school, for example, and there's some people there that you're kind of like, oh, they're cool, but I don't really know them. Like, be like, y'all want to just have like a cup of coffee, like some morning? Like I'd love to know more about like what you do or who you are. And like, I have a podcast and I'm kind of just curious to meet more people in the community. Like you can sort of start your own thing and like invite people in. Like, I think oftentimes we think of networking as this very transactional experience where you walk into a room and you get like, literally like people just like throw business cards at you and and you're just like kind of assaulted by business cards and, like aggressive handshakes. But like networking can literally be striking up a conversation, with somebody new at a PTA meeting, at the grocery store, you just never know. But I think we live in this world now where people are just like afraid to talk to each other. And some of that is, like I don't blame people sometimes. I also say this as a white woman of privilege. So it is safer for me in many spaces to do that. And so I want to like be very upfront about that too. But I think sometimes we have opportunities right in front of us in social circles we've already created, and we're just kind of not necessarily seeing it. I also think that there's a lot of online networking happening now, and to me, it doesn't necessarily replace in-person networking. But as part of like my community, there's also a digital group. And that's really so that if you don't live somewhere where there's like a live meeting happening every month, you can still plug in and show up on Zoom. But I think if anything, if you do find a group that you do like to go to, then the key is to go consistently. I mean, it's just like you don't go to the gym once and then you don't go back for a year. I think sometimes people are like networking doesn't work, but when you really sit down and like see what you're doing, like you're like, well, I went to like 8 different groups one time and I didn't get any business. Networking is relationship building. And most of the time, you don't like book a sale or make a sale by giving someone a business card. It just is not like that. It's like you think about sometimes how many times we like find a pair of shoes and we're like, oh, I really like those. And we still like have them in our cart. And then we're like, oh, I'm going to wait till the price drops. And then, oh, I don't know if I should really buy these right now. And then like 6 months later, we buy the shoes, and that's like a shoe, like a $30 pair of shoes or a skincare product or something. We still like have all these like, I have all this stuff like sitting in a cart right now that I want to like take advantage of a Black Friday sale. And I still haven't done it because life, So yes, it's like you have to go into networking, any kind of networking situation, whether it's online, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, and that's networking too, whether it's a live group. Like if you're going in with the intention of what is in this for me, it is not going to work for you. If you're going in it with the intention of like, I'm curious, who can I meet here? Does this energetically vibe with me and feel like a space I want to come back to? And like, you don't have to come back. If you're like, oh, this was like a bunch of weirdos, like I have no interest, like that's cool. But like oftentimes I think it's like, well, I'm just going to go to as many different groups as I can instead of actually finding one that you like and then putting in the like time and effort to build the relationships, which will then actually work for you. I mean, I was in a BNI group for years, running the meetings, all this stuff. And it wasn't until like year 4 that I actually got a referral that has since become like a multi six-figure referral. But it did not happen the first meeting. It did not happen the first year. It did not happen the second year. And I think we have this instant gratification kind of culture that we live in now of like, I'm going to post something and I'm going to get 12 likes within 3 seconds, that we forget that like when it comes to like actually building like a strategic networking group for, like network for yourself, you have to like be a human being. You have to show up and you have to like play the long game. And like,
Totally.
and that's kind of it. So.
Oh, I love it. Okay, but I do want to hear your shameless plug for your networking thing.
Yeah, so I started a different group a couple years ago in Denver, and that was pre-COVID. And then COVID just tanked it because it was really live. We tried to kind of move to Zoom, and people were so Zoom, overwhelmed at that point that it just never happened.
Yeah.
Then I had a second kiddo, and coming out of that, I was really wanting to get back in person with people, but I just was like, I knew very clearly I wanted to be with moms for that reason we talked about earlier, of like people who kind of understand, like if you walk in and you've got coffee all over your shirt, like cool, not just me, like you too, you had a bad morning too, like, oh, I need to breastfeed my kid. Like that was the world that I wanted to be playing, the playground, the sandbox I wanted to play in. So I was like, I posted in a Facebook group, like, hey, like any other moms in business want to get together for coffee. And there was like 2 likes and 1 comment. But then a couple of weeks later, 10 to 12 of us got together. And that was kind of the beginning. And at first it was really informal. And then I realized like, this is what I want to be like doing. So now it's called Renegade Motherhood. And we do have 4 live locations right now, 3 in Colorado, 1 in Phoenix.
Nice.
And then we have a digital community too. It's called the Mother Mind Collective. I think I'm changing the name to like Renegade Motherhood All Access. I'm not sure yet. But that is a digital group. So it's a paid, I think a affordable, like paid community. And through that, there's also coaching hours. There's small group like masterminds and digital connection and networking and workshops and things like that. I bring in some guest experts. So that's something where you can live anywhere, but I'm really looking to expand and really grow locations throughout the country so that there's, representation in other places, because I still really believe in the power of like, if you can get a bunch of entrepreneurial, trailblazing moms in a room together, it's magic. It's pretty cool what can happen.
Totally.
So,
Well,
yeah.
and I've noticed I've been able to make some like real life friends like online, like on Instagram and other social media. But I've noticed that like it doesn't become like real until we meet in person. And I feel like it just makes the process go faster when you just meet in person to begin with.
Yeah.
So
I know with you,
I
I'm
think
like, I want you to come to a meeting. You're awesome. Like it'll be,
oh, that would be
I
so
know.
fun.
It just doesn't, there's just something
open
about the hug or the hand, the handshake, the thing that just like makes it real. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. And it's just, yeah, totally. I agree. So yeah. Open one in Utah, please, so that I can go.
We should talk. Maybe you want to open
I
one
know,
in
that'd be
Utah.
fun. Oh man. Okay. Another time, another call.
Yeah, totally.
So as we're wrapping up, I want you to tell all of my people, and I guess I want to hear too, how can people find you? How can people learn more from you?
Yeah, totally. So you can go to renegademotherhood.com, and that's where event listings are. You can learn more about the digital community there. And I also have a quiz that you can take that tells you your main character persona, and then will give you more of like the benefits, the possible challenges to look out for, and then actually ways when you're really embracing your main character persona to build your own stage, of visibility, and then also how to build your network in a strategic way. So you can take that quiz there. And then, if you live in like, Colorado, Phoenix area, you can check out live events. I'm also going to be doing more, kind of sneak peeks, digital workshops and networking events too, that people who are curious and want to come and check things out. So depending when this airs, it could be up there. We'll see. But everything's on renegademotherhood.com. And then Instagram is renegade.motherhood. And I'm also, I hang out on it's Jen Morris. as well on Instagram. Oh, and I have a Facebook group. I always forget to mention this on podcasts, but a Facebook group that we can put in the show notes, which is open to moms in business throughout the country. So we're at almost 600 people. I think it was local to our area at first. And then I was like, let's just open it up. So that's growing, and I don't have a ton of like rules around it. I know a lot of the groups have tons of rules of when you can post and like what minute of the day you can post about what. I haven't felt a need to have that much structure yet. So we'll see. Could change, but you can definitely
Sounds good. Okay.
come join that group there too.
Yes. Okay. I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes so that we can find you wherever we want to find you. And this has been delightful. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. You're an awesome interviewer. You have really good questions, and
Thank
not
you.
everybody does. So I just want to reflect that back to you.
Thank you. It is something I have been working on for quite some time. So I'm really glad that it's paying off.
Love it. Thanks for having me.
Isn't Jen just delightful? Her energy and her insights into business and just being a creative human are off the charts amazing. Now, here's a quick recap of what Jen and I talked about. First, embracing main character energy helps you live to your fullest potential and also helps you to be your happiest self, which we all want, right? Right. The second takeaway is one way that you can deal with self-doubt and your inner critic is to make sure that when you try something new, start a business, do something creative, that you're doing it in a way that feeds your soul and works best for you, not just because someone told you to do it that way. I know from personal experience that when I try to fit myself into someone else's mold, I'm always going to not do it perfectly because it's not my mold. So it's not going to work out the way that I want it to because I'm doing it someone else's way instead of my own way. The third takeaway is the best way to form and hold boundaries around family, work, and your own self is communication. Talk through what boundaries you need and why they're in place, right? I feel like it makes so much sense, but sometimes we just need that reminder. I definitely need that reminder to take a step back and over communicate. So for me, I need to remind my family, hey, I have this podcast because it makes me happy, and also to help contribute financially for our family so that when I go to a podcast conference that takes me away from them for 4 days, then everyone knows why I'm there. And they not only know why I'm there, but they can also cheer me on because they know that I'm following my dreams. The fourth takeaway is if you're wanting to meet people and do some more networking to help more people know about your podcast and just to find people that you connect with, look at the groups that you're already a part of, like the women in your kids' classes or the people in your high fitness class, and ask them if you can get to know them a little bit better, if that's going for a coffee or maybe it's just having a conversation with them that's more than just about the weather or your kids. Would you share this episode with your friend who also has a creative endeavor, if that's a podcast or a regular painting class that they go to? We all need these reminders as moms who are trying to carve out time for ourselves. I have missed putting out regular episodes, but it has given me the time and space to plan some super fun things for season 3. So keep an eye out. Season 3 comes back the first Tuesday in March. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the spring.